Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Backstory: I own a 6-hour B320 airsoft version. I use it as my sidearm and use a different gun as my main firearm. But for today, just because I thought for fun, I would use my sidearm only. The story: the round I was in had just ended and I felt that my gun needed a bit of maintenance and some grease. I sat back on a table and disassembled it. Note, it isn't too hard to disassemble the SIG. I had all the pieces laid out and was greasing them. I saw a kid and his mom walk into the waiting area for the games. I was seated near the entrance and as he walked in, they saw me. The kid had a rental gun, which is pretty crappy. I went into the round. His entitled parent sat down near me and got onto her phone. I was still cleaning and greasing everything when the kid got back. It was fairly obvious that the gun was broken in some way by the way he was looking at it and kinda shaking and winding the mag. For those who don't know, the way to cycle BBs in a high-capacity magazine is bottom to feed. There is this wheel you wind in the bottom to feed. He walked up to his mom and started whining to her about it. She did this long drawn-out sigh and walked with her kid to the front desk. I don't know what happened, but I can only assume they probably told her to wait because she came back with her kid whining and yelling about how it wasn't fair. Now, I was ready for the next round, so I picked up my pistol and walked into the arena. The round came and went and was really fun. When I went back to my table, the kid had picked up and was toying around with my gun. I'm usually fairly chill if people ask to see my gun, because it was pretty decked out in terms of attachments and looked like something you might see in a video game. I let him play with it, but then I wanted it back because, well, I decided this round I was going to use my rifle. I asked for it back, but he ignored me and kept playing around with it. I asked a little more forcefully, but he still wouldn't give it back. Finally, I had enough and just took it out of his hands. The kid started screaming and yelling about how he wanted it, but the round was starting soon, so I just went into the starting arena. Then the mom, without eye protection, went into the zone. Now, this is a huge no-go in pretty much any airsoft establishment due to the possibility of being shot in the eye or really anywhere in the face. The ref asked her to leave, but she kept protesting that I had taken her son's gun. Now I had been there quite a few times, so the refs knew me and my gun, and told the Karen to either get out or be escorted out by security. Quick thing to know, that'll be more important later. I had left my SIG back at the table. I played around and as I was walking back to the table, I saw the mom and her kid. The kid had my SIG in his hands disassembled. The SIG isn't that hard to disassemble. Now this by itself isn't a huge problem. It's still a problem though. But he was smearing the grease into places grease shouldn't be. And also on the handle of my gun. I sprinted over and took the parts of my gun back. The kid again started crying. And this is when the mother stepped in. "Give my son back that toy." Yes, she called my gun a toy. No, I will not. This is an expensive item that I will not just hand to your kid. No, give it back right now. No, I will not. If you don't give it back right now, I will call the police. For what? For hurting my son's feeling. She no joke said that. Me struggling not to laugh. Okay, you can call them. 1. That's not a thing they will arrest for. And 2. I have dozens of people here who will likely testify against you. The mother then slaps the parts of my gun out of my hand. Now I freaked out because if one of those pieces hit the floor in a wrong way, it could drab, it could warp. And if my red dot on my pistol hit the floor in a wrong way, it could shatter. Luckily, nothing broke and everything seemed fine. And this is when security came and took her away. I could hear her screaming about the police and how she would sue me, all while being taken out by security. Funny thing is, this isn't the first time I've had a Karen encounter in airsoft, and I've had quite a few entitled kid stories about airsoft. I purchased my house in 2015, not even a thought of an HOA in the village. At the time, my neighbors were the chemistry to the west, 5 acres of woodland to the north, neighbor's house 200 feet away to the east, and south frontage onto a secondary highway, with land dropping off on the far side. Ideal location for compromising Hop's mentality of middle of nowhere, antisocial stance, and my wanting at least neighbors within screaming distance. Fast forward to 2021. Land parcel to the north, sold to some numbered company, then the one neighbor we had listed his house for sale. As discovered after the fact, Mark sincerely apologized when he realized what happened. The same company bought his house and land in early 2022. They razed his house and outbuildings and applied for rezoning. So far, nothing concerns me. Well, they started subdividing the land for lots, applied to have road allowances, water services, no wastewater service available. 'Cause rural village. This means to those not familiar that they have to allow square footage on a lot for a septic system, which for a 2 bedrooms, 2 bathroom house is minimum 750 square feet, with a specific setback from the adjacent property lines. Also, the township I live has no requirements for fence permits, just height rules for front line of house line 4 feet versus backyard 6 feet. And you may not install the fence over the property line, and unless agreed upon in writing prior to fence installation, it may not be installed on a property line, with the adjoining neighbor being responsible for cost and /or maintenance. Well, so far I have been given notice of 1. Variance application to have the 2 houses planned next to me have their septic beds closer to my property line than township bylaws allow. 2. Legal notice to allow fencing to be built on a property line, with have the linear cost be assigned to my address. 3. Notice from the developer's lawyers that I, as an adjacent property, will be required to abide by their neighbor aesthetic requirements, which comes down to rules on house, garage, outbuilding colors, vehicles allowed on property, and color of flowers allowed in publicly visible flower beds. Red, white, and blue only. Excuse me? I live in Canada. Red, white, maybe, but blue? Yeah, right. Try again. I bought this house without deed restrictions. My name is Karen. I am the original 1967 version. My mother had a premonition about the bewitch I would grow up to be. Bring it on. Bring it on. Update. Township council meetings are on the 15th of each month. Last night I attended, as this was when the variance application for the development next door was to be discussed and decided on. Sat through 2 very boring hours of other township business. When it came to the developer's turn to explain why they needed the variance, it came down to because the septic beds would need to be raised due to water table heights. Moving the septics further back on a lot would allow additional flat area between the houses and the septic beds, so that future homeowners would have more room to install things like an above-ground swimming pool. For those not familiar, putting a swimming pool on a septic bed is a bad thing. First question council asked after the developer went through their arguments, any objections to this variance request? I stood and voiced my objections. These are quarter-acre lots. It is not a space issue. Wanting more room for toys is not a valid reason for a variance for an item that could have an environmental impact to my property. Variance denied. When I was a university student, I picked up a second job at fish and chip franchise run by a wealthy middle-aged woman and owned by her and her radio personality husband, who was definitely operating it at a loss. This didn't seem to bother her, as it was clearly a hobby for her. Quickly, it became obvious that they had a seriously fast staff turnover issue. They had one manager who had been there about a year, and no other service staff that had been there more than a few weeks. I already had years of hospitality experience at this point. I was quite comfortable with processes and cash machine system, which I brought up multiple times. but I was stuck running food the whole time because the manager had become used to doing everything himself and untrusting. After seeing so many staff come and go and clearly just found that easier, I worked here 1 day a week, only working 4-hour shifts as their opening hours were just a small window in the evening. This job was a complete waste of my time, and I was being treated like a child. I worked here for about 2 months, and in this time she had never bothered to pay me and always had an excuse. I had become fed up and sent her my letter of resignation and told her that I was coming before university to pick up the money she had owed me, to which she said fine. I also added that I would be on my way to class and didn't have long. The restaurant was next to the train station that I took to university, so to please have my money ready in cash, typical for hospitality. I arrive and she's talking to a customer/friend. I decided that she knew I didn't have long and would surely wrap it up to pay me and set me on my way. But she proceeded to small talk with this woman for 10 minutes while I politely waved amid eye contact, gesturing at my wristwatch, implying that I had to go, to which she held up a finger to me multiple times, implying just a moment. This went on for an unreasonable amount of time, and she was clearly power tripping and being rude. So after missing my train, I said in my outdoor voice, "Pay me the money you owe me or I am calling the police." She scoffed and took me behind the counter and asked the manager to provide her with a red binder. To which he replied, "What red binder?" "You know, the one with everyone's shift and payroll stuff." "I've never heard or seen of such a binder," said her manager. They argue back and forth for a minute or so. I don't believe that this binder even exists at this point. She turns to me and says, "What do I owe you? How many hours did you work?" I say I worked 51 hours. I have probably worked around 19 to 15 hours. To my surprise, she then proceeds to unlock her cash box in her office and hand me $1,100, and she throws it into an envelope for me. I thanked her and power walked out of there before the manager, who had walked away at this point, caught wind of my life. I couldn't believe it. This lady had just paid me 4 times what I was owed. I was probably only owed around $250, which, if she had any organizational skills, would have paid me already. And she would have known the amount if she made any effort to keep track of her employees' rosters. So, I was laid off. No big deal, right? It happens. But in this instance, it's a little different. I was working at a tech startup and was one of the early employees. I was one of the key people to develop their technology, which significantly helped enable them to raise tens of millions of dollars. I was told early on that they would basically take care of me as the company grew. Well, for a time at least, the company grew leaps and bounds, again much in part to the excellent tech I helped develop. Yet, the company had little concern for little old me. Meanwhile, they brought on a bevy of new managers and high-level people, and yet my career was basically stagnant while I was there. But then things started to slow down due to economic conditions. There have been a couple of layoffs, and I figured it was probably time to leave the sinking ship. So I lined up a new position at another company. I then went into my manager and told him that it seemed like more layoffs were imminent and that I had secured a job offer at another company. I asked him if it would be a good idea if I should take it, and he said that he would let me know. A couple of days later, after he had discussed things with the CEO, they said I was okay and not to take the other position. I turned down the other position because I had invested so much of myself into this company, even having sold my house and moved hundreds of miles to work at this company, and I still had a lot of stock options that I was hoping would be worth something someday. Literally a couple of weeks later, guess what? Yep, they laid me off. Now that another position was no longer available, and because this was at the height of the recession, I was out of work for 4 months until I found another position. I could have even lost my house during this time, and I had to sell some cool stuff to keep paying the bills. The new position I finally found was much further from home and was a financial hardship. I would have been better off if they had just been honest with me and told me to take the offer I had in hand previously, but honestly, wasn't ever their policy. Anyhow, before I was involuntarily separated from the company, I was working with a Fortune 500 company that was trying to partner with us on some technology. After leaving, I got wind that they were going to invest $50 million in the company. That bothered me for several reasons, mostly because most of us were pretty sure that the crooked CEO was pilfering the company for personal gains. I'm thinking that this guy shouldn't be rewarded for his atrocious management of the company. And honestly, I didn't think that it would be a wise investment for this large company. I contacted my inside guy at the Fortune 500 and told him some of my concerns about the stewardship of the money at the startup and that it wasn't really a wise investment. This company was looking for a distribution deal for our technology, so I told him the best use of their money would be to make a deal to exchange a large blanket purchase order for stock. This way, the startup company would still get a big chunk of investment money coming in, but they would have to perform for it. It is the difference between giving a kid an allowance for no reason at all, or giving a kid an allowance based on if they did their chores or not. I didn't necessarily want the investors to walk away from a partnership because I had many friends still at the company and didn't want to see them out in the cold. So my thought was that this type of a deal would keep the company afloat while minimizing the potential of pilfering and better protecting the investment. All in all, if structured right, it could be a win-win and make it more difficult for the crooked CEO and his cronies to loot the company. I additionally told him that I wouldn't recommend investing a penny unless they got a seat on the board of directors. That way, they would have first-hand knowledge of some of the shenanigans going on behind the scenes with their money. That was about it. Now they were armed with some additional information and tactics to perhaps better protect their investment as well as help ensure that if they did invest, everything would be above board. Sometime later, I heard that the CEO pulled the entire company into the conference room and chewed them a new one. He was furious because the investor had somewhat done what I had suggested. They had dropped their investment from $50 million to $5 million and had come up with some sort of blanket order or something along those lines. I am not quite sure, but in essence, it meant a $10 million loss in the mind of the CEO. He's a bit of a fat slob, so it's quite unfortunate that he didn't just have a heart attack right then and there. No surprise, in the process the investor was denied the board seat, and one can only guess why. Dirty secrets and all. In fact, one of the board members that the CEO did bring on board had already done time for defrauding his clients. A marriage made in heaven, I guess. So, not necessarily meant as revenge, but sweet nonetheless. The company basically lost $10 million because of what they did to me. They were all but expecting this money. Had they not laid me off, I probably wouldn't have even thought about putting the investors' interests above that of the corrupt company. In the end, surprising to no one, the investor eventually got majorly screwed by the unscrupulous startup company anyways. The two companies had some disagreements about their distribution agreement, and the investor ended up having to pay a major settlement to the startup company after a contentious mediation. But never fear, don't screw with the Fortune 500. As the startup company was starting to gasp its last breath, they were working on a promising deal with another company they had identified as a major potential customer, one that would put them back on a track to financial success and further line the CEO's dirty pockets. Well, the Fortune 500 company got wind of the deal, bought the other company, and then shut down the deal. That is ninja-level revenge. So in the end, 2 nuclear revenges for the price of 1. I couldn't have been happier to hear about the karmic justice once again hitting this company. Now the company is all but dead. All physical assets went to auction. The CEO is still milking the last few dollars out of the account. But because our Securities Exchange Commission is all but worthless, he'll start another venture and the cycle will repeat itself. The sad thing is that the CEO, in my humble opinion, makes Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of Theranos, look like Mother Teresa. I pray that one day they do a Netflix docu-series exposing all that went on at this mess of a company. I can guarantee you, it will be quite a hit.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.